So I said, dream where I was falling into chasm.
Oh, God.
My bed and room were dark. It was light because I went back to sleep, so it was still light out, but my bed and room were dark again. Every movement or choice I made was difficult, and I feel like that's what it's like dealing with it's like a physical representation of dealing with any difficult mental choices. It sort of reminded me of Jung's idea of actualization, that you have to go into this thing. And I have this concept of as above, so below, staircase. So as above, so below. What does that mean? The farther that you climb up a mountain, or the taller of a building you build, the farther you may also fall. And in that, decisions are scary. So I feel like this was a physical manifestation, or expression or metaphor of this, where I was just floating around in my bed and was falling downwards into chaos, and I was floating around. I was literally floating around my room. I was just floating around my room.
Yeah.
And then I was falling down underneath my bed. It was gravity was turned off. It was fucking wild.
So what was that trying to represent? What's your...
That decisions are difficult because you couldn't move right because it's a dream, and I was like, okay, I have to get back to my bed and go back to sleep, but every decision would cause the gravity to act differently, and I couldn't get nothing I did.
That's it. I mean, that's interesting. It's probably manifesting just a fear of decision making and making the right decision, man.
Yeah, that's what it is.
It's hard.
It's a really weird representation, huh?
Yeah, you could be right. I don't know.
And of course that's true because if you're not in a really simple and easy to move in order, if you're in an order let's say an order has roads inside of it, that's infrastructure basically.
Okay.
Because orders kind of have infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. An order that doesn't have orderly infrastructure, it becomes very difficult to make decisions and have those decisions have the results you expect. So you make a decision and something completely different than what you expect to happen will happen.
Yeah.
This is Jordan Peterson, but Jordan Peterson said that to be in order is to have your decisions have the desired effect. To be in chaos is to not be able to affect change upon reality. Because you can't.
Oh, yeah, because I couldn't control myself.
Yeah, you'd move forward and gravity would change.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That was a weird dream, dude. My favorite shit on the planet is sleep reality, where you're just
Dude, I had a really important dream recently, but I can't remember it. It was so important.
I did too. No, I did too.
You idiots. I remembered.
Barely.
The more you understand things, the more in the world, the more you become afraid to interact with things in the world, because you understand that every decision has more meaning. Right? And this leads, you can get trapped in that, and then that's inwardness. You can be trapped into inward behavior, and this is what we talked about with the West sailing, but the East became very inward and just looked for spirituality, and the West was more successful in their approach to the world by some degree. And
there's pros and cons to both, right? It's important to address that. We're not trying to say that one is for sure better than the other. Well, we are. The West is more successful, so they are better, just innately.
Yeah,
but there was also a lot of problems, and there's a lot of.
It's not like Plato wasn't extremely inward.
Yeah, he was too. I know. That's what I'm saying. That's why there's a balance that you need.
Yeah, there is.
You need to be healthily inward so you can go outward. You can't go outward to escape your inward traumas.
Everything needs the Goldilocks zone pendulum effect to take place. What I mean by Goldilocks zone pendulum effect is that things need to find the middle, or the Goldilocks zone. And they do this by starting in the middle as nothing and reaching two ends of extremes, which is the swaying from left to right, and then be reborn again in the middle as truth, which is the gravity eventually centers the spheres.
What I said is important. That's an important metaphor. If you're going outward to escape your inward struggle, That's where it's going to go to failure. You can't look inward to solve your problems, but you have to solve your inward problems before you can even attempt an outward problem. You know what I mean? The only time, you have to be healthy with yourself, man.
That's a fair point. Japan could have just collapsed, but...
Well, I'm talking about that point for just everyone who's listening.
Yeah.
Like, you can't expect to be successful in the world when you're, when you're not right in your own head. When you're not at peace with your own self.
That can be kind of viewed as well, I mean, there's a what's that quote by who was it? I can't remember. Either way, the quote where it's easier to rule a city than to rule yourself.
That's crazy.
I would almost disagree with that personally, but I don't know. I could be wrong.
But the point was, the more you understand, it's harder to interact with things because you know that every decision has immense ramifications that we can't even comprehend.
I agree.
Doesn't that spark anything to anyone?
I mean,
that's an insane
It makes
concept.
total sense to me, but now let's try and articulate it more. Like,
you still have to make decisions though because it's all sort of.
To an extent, that's why I'm preaching to you to not care what anyone thinks, especially a flawed society that hates you. I mean, like, if you're trying to think about the ramifications to stuff that doesn't matter to you, then you can't. Like, we'll loop it back to the start. The frames of mind. You got to use important frames of mind. You got to use important stuff to you to build the frames of mind to make a decision.
I think that can be seen as an aspect of the ego-id distinction as I see it, or the self-ego distinction as I see it, okay. where the self contains this gamut of possible decisions that can be made because the decisions have to be made based on your prior experience.
Gamut.
Yeah, it's a perfect word for it, really.
All right.
So the self contains the entire gamut of decisions that your personal experiences can allow for, and then the ego can choose which side of the self to support.
What you're trying to describe?
What is the self? It contains everything that what? The gamut of what?
All of the possible ways that you can be, all the decisions you can make, all of your potential self, and you choose which parts to support in the ego.
Alright, that makes sense, yeah. You just have to be careful with your ego of what to pick.
Well, what I'm going to say is, are we, how do I put this? So, it's enough of a thing to declare what it means that good decisions must be made. We don't have to, in order to validate that, declare what those good decisions are. That's the job of the rest of philosophy. I think what we're doing here is we're making the metaphysical, ontological statement that good decisions are a necessity, and that's the important thing.
Yeah, and then not just by the self, but by the society.
Yeah.
As a collective,
we're falling behind schedule.
That's fine.
As a collective, things have to be made good. My point here basically is that as a collective, by everybody avoiding their problems and not solving the problem within themselves first, my theory is that when everyone avoids a problem in themselves, it alters their decision making, which adds up to a societal decision making where nothing gets done. So until everybody fights those inward battles, we can't project outward correctly.
Yeah.
Because, right.
How are you going to be able to? All right, I have two things I want to say. One, I want to re-articulate the thing I said about that the more you understand, the harder decisions are, or at least can be. So imagine you're on a boat in the Arctic and there's ice caps around you all the time, right? You only see the tip of an iceberg, right? But underneath the water, it's a huge mountain, right? Yeah. Let's say each iceberg is a database of possible narratives, okay? And that this is your life choices. That you move around and you pick different things to build on.
So what are your life choices?
The different databases, which are icebergs. You're on a boat in the Arctic, right?
Oh, so the databases are things that your brain comes up with to pick from?
Yeah, and decisions you make.
Okay.
Really mixing metaphors here, aren't you?
No. So, yes, I am. Okay, so here's the thing. Most people are always on the top of the ocean, and they just interact with just the little tiny tips of the icebergs. And it doesn't seem that scary because they are less enormous and daunting. But if you have the ability to see underneath and below and see this huge cavern that opens up and domes, what's the word? Exponentially grows out.
Yes.
Domes. It's more scary to make decisions because there's so much information involved in everything. But what you have to understand is that more than likely, all the icebergs are probably the same size. And sometimes it's smart to just interact with stuff at face value. But that doesn't mean you can't avoid the full truth to everything. So that's a good metaphor. Secondly, I have a couple things. Hold on. Shit, what were we talking about before that? Why sins? You have to be careful of your own sins.
Oh, for sure.
If you, I saw why when I was taking the stupidest psychology test. I was sitting there thinking about this. If you make a decision that's poor, but you make up for the decision being poor and continue to make this poor decision, and it's not really that bad because there's some comfort to it or something that overrules your understanding of it's bad, it like spirals and grows out. And it starts influencing your other decisions.
Yeah.
And the way you perceive others' poor decisions. Well, it's not too bad.
Well, imagine that your self is like sitting on a spectrum from good to bad. If you keep like encouraging this one bad thing but making up for it with more good things, that's fine because your good side continues to grow. Uh-huh. But what eventually starts to happen is you get this like sunken middle where the bad side is growing with the good side, and the middle is like, it's like a cell in mitosis. It just, if the middle keeps shrinking relative to everything else, it just kind of splits after a while, and now you have this dangerous shadow.
Yeah, you're not integrating your shadow, you're just chopping it off.
Yeah.
That's bad. And that's really great articulation. And I also thought it allows you to make up for other people's fuck-ups, because you're like, let's say, like jacking off. Well, it helps me sleep. Like, that's a little sin. Well, it helps me sleep. And that's your excuse for it. And it grows, and it grows, and then someone is fucking, drinks too much. Well, whatever.
Just a couple drinks.
Their decisions.
Yeah.
And then it just slowly spirals into just not goodness. You have to be really careful with how you behave.
Well, yeah, I mean, it dulls your senses down, man. You start to, if everybody around you does fucking crack, you're going to start thinking crack's not that big of a deal.
And you can't even comprehend that because no one does that.
Yeah,
that's how people actually believe in the really bad
and
ghettos.
Groups function a lot like macrocosms individuals. So, you make a bad decision as an individual, and you create a little shadow. If a bunch of people in a group make a bad decision, it creates a shadow for that group's culture, which can influence the people inside of it.
For sure. Great articulate.